Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all my Nigerian brothers and sisters for welcoming us and giving us a very good reception. My presentation is on Islamic education, and I've requested our colleagues there to project. So as we wait for them to project, but basically I'm looking at Islamic education, and that is our main theme today, the main topic actually of the conference, Islamic learning and scholarship. And it's actually connected to what my brother, Prof. Abidin has said, the extension of Islamic scholarship and learning along the East African coast. But I'm looking at it from another perspective, the perspective of competition between three levels of education, or rather three systems of education. The first one, is it okay? The first one is what I call the Islamic traditional education, ITE, or some people will also call it classical, Islamic classical education. And then the other one is the conventional education. Some people will also refer to as the secular or the formal education. And finally, which is a new phenomenon, and I believe we have it across the African continent, including Nigeria, it is the Islamic integrated system, trying to actually to strike a balance between the classical and the modern, trying to, you will see it in my presentation, is actually achieving or acquiring the best of the two worlds, looking at the classical, traditional, and also looking at the formal, the secular, so-called secular or conventional education. So that is my title and my topic. Transformation of Islamic learning in Kenya, a tripartite competition between the three systems, the Islamic traditional, the secular, formal, and then the new phenomenon which has come up in the early 80s and 90s, which is integration, trying to integrate. But more important is to try to preserve the Muslim identity of the learners, because out of experience, parents have noted that the learners, the children who go to school, they don't get enough, the Islamic component. Therefore, they have to look for a substitute. They have to look another, heavier dose, and that is why the issue of Islamic integration comes in. So it's more of trying to preserve and protect the Muslim identity. And but before that, as my brother has said, Islam has contributed enormously in terms of culture and education across the African continent, but particularly in the East African coast, along the East African coast, as Abdulkadir has said, establishing the centers of learning from Barawa to Mombasa to Kilwa until Mozambique down to the southern sub-Saharan Africa. So we notice the issue of these dichotomies, the dual systems of various spheres of life, not only in terms of education, but also in terms of other spheres of life, like Islamic economics. The pioneers, like Bakr Sadr and others, that was the same struggle which they're trying to balance, between economics, the conventional economics, and between the Islamic economics. Again, Islamic banking, and I believe in Nigeria you are ahead before many other countries. So that notion of trying to strike a balance between two ends, the extreme end of conventional setup and then the other end of Islamic values. So how do we balance, how do we strike a balance? That is where the issue of integration comes in. So integration, and I think it needs to be studied in detail on all those spheres of life, when it comes to Islamic banking, when it comes to insurance, takaful, it comes to even Islamic law. Malaysia is one of the heading states in our Muslim countries where they have tried to strike a balance and try to bring those notions of justice between Islam and the common law. So this notion of integration is not only in terms of education, but it's there across our lives. Why? Because Muslims have noted that without integrating Islamic values in our life, there is a deficit. So that is why we have those components of integration. But I'll only be focusing on education, on Muslim education. So in terms of education, we have that scenario of competing, different systems of education. On one hand, you have the conventional education, which basically is a Christian, as we've heard today from one of our guest speakers, that colonialism has come in the face of civilization, but inside it was evangelization. And that's what happened in our areas, particularly in East Africa. So competition between, on one hand, if I may call it conventional, but basically it's Christian, and then you have the Islamic component. Now, what happened? There was that competition between the three scenarios, and we know that Islamic education is part and parcel of lives of our children, and that is why we have that significance of Islamic education, not only as a subject, but as an agent of inculcating values in the learners and the children. So it's not an academic subject. When, like Kenya now, for example, in the formal system, they have a unit which is called IRE, Islamic Religious Education. They have also a unit for other faiths, Christian CRE, Christian Religious Education. They have a unit also for the Hindus, Hindu Religious Education. But it's not enough for the Muslim children to get all those values. And that is why the concept of integration came up. And we have those models here, the classical models in various countries in the world. And a good example here in Nigeria, Sangaya, I think if I pronounce it properly. And in Indonesia, Malaysia, Fondoks. But in our region, they are called Chuo or Duksi or Madrasa. Madrasa, I think, is famous also here. So that is what we mean by the Islamic traditional education. Children go there and just learn Islamic education, Islamic values, including memorization of Quran, Hadith, and etc. But now, there is a gap between the formal and the traditional Islamic education, because these children, when they go to Islamic traditional education alone, they cannot cope with the demands of the modern market. So there's that gap, there's that lacuna. Yeah? That is why there was a call for having to integrate both systems. Another aspect which is very important, and I think it has been touched today, the issue of marginalizing Islamic education and culture. And that is what the British did in our area, and I believe also here, trying to marginalize, trying to put on the periphery anything to do with Islamic culture, anything to do with Islamic education is, being put in the periphery. For example, in Kenya, until 1940s and 50s, Swahili language was written in Arabic script. Even we have, I forgot, I should have brought a picture of a currency of that time. It was written in Swahili, but using the Arabic script. So anything to do with Islamic culture was gradually, eliminated and erased from the minds of the Muslims in those areas. Ultimately, you find that you only have the secular or the so-called conventional education. That is where the problem came, because when our scholars, the ones Abdin has mentioned, one of them actually is Alamin Mazrui, who fought very much on the issue of the conventional secular education and brought up the issue of having to integrate Islamic values in education. One of them was Alamin Mazrui, the other one was Muhammad Ghazali, who was the first scholar in 1933 to start that program. He opened a madrasa, but he brought in other subjects, which the learners needed, like mathematics, the basics, mathematics and English to communicate and try to, fulfill the requirements of the market. So the concept of Islamic integration is very old in Kenya, although now it has grown up. In fact, it went beyond. Now it has been commercialized. If you want to get a business, just go and open a Islamic integrated school. The next day it will be filled up with learners, unfortunately. But anyway, but the essence is that to try to give these learners values, Islamic values. I said earlier the role of colonialism, be it British or French or others, the mission was to go and evangelize. And that is why we found Islamic knowledge and education was in the periphery, trying to eliminate, gradually. Of course, the British has a long history of, eliminating gradually, including the indirect rule, even here in Nigeria, how to rule people indirectly and gradually try to remove, those aspects and those values. And that is the aspect which made Muslims to be, actually it alarmed Muslim scholars. If our children are going to be taken to conventional schools which are manned and managed by colonialists, then we will lose our future. Therefore, they came up with that option of having an Islamic integrated system. I mentioned 1933 was one of the very oldest schools in that. But again, even in the Islamic traditional system, there were challenges. These learners could not cope with the demand of the markets, like basic, like English communication skills and all that. And then most of them were relying on memorization of the Quran, memorization of the Hadith, and even some others have criticized them and labeled them as parrot learning. You just go and memorize. After that, the child cannot cope with the demands. But scholars like Alamin Mazrui, Muhammad Ghazali, and others came up with that idea of integrating these values, Islamic values, in the students. Again, even the conventional education system had problems, and one of the major challenges is the lack of the Islamic input. There were no values. The child will just be taught all other subjects, the normal secular conventional subjects, but with a very little dose in terms of Islamic knowledge. Now, when it came to Islamic integrated system, that was the reason and the logic actually why that particular system was introduced, and basically was to preserve the Muslim identity of these students. Again, we have challenges. Although it was a new system and beneficial to the Muslim children, but there were challenges. One of the challenges was that the children were overburdened, because instead of taking, because basically like primary school, the requirement is only three subjects. Instead of 3 now, our young children will be overburdened by 3 plus other 7, 3 social studies, science and mathematics and English, and then you have other 7 subjects, Quran, Hadith, and Lugha Arabiya, and blah, 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 blah. So you find these young children, the innocent, are the victims of these scenarios, competing scenarios, because they don't have the time. A child will leave at home at around 5 in the morning. A young child, we are talking about 5-year-old, 6-year-old, class 1, class 2, grade 1, grade 2. The child lives at home at 5, and he or she comes back at 6 in the evening. Why? Because the program is comprehensive. The child actually is taken into different, he will start with English, and then Quran, and then history, and then blah, 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 until the evening. So one of the challenges of Islamic integrated system, beside its advantages, is that the children, as well as the teachers, were overwhelmed. It's heavy, the dose is very heavy. In fact, you find nowadays, I always tell my friends and colleagues, when we were studying at primary school, those years in 70s, we used to come back and have lunch at home, and then sleep. And then at 4, you go and play football until Maghrib. And then Maghrib, you go to Duksi or Madrasa. So you feel your day, you really rested and exhausted all those areas. But nowadays, the child leaves home at 6, at 5, and he comes back at 6 in the evening. So no time to rest, no time to have that peace of mind in those young children. So those are one of the challenges of Muslim integrated system. Number 2, lack of uniformity of the curricula, because as I said earlier, it's a private. Islamic integrated system is a private system of education, and anyone, if he wants to do a business, just go and open a school, integrated school, and you get a lot of students. But the problem is lack of uniformity in terms of the curricula. So this school will take a curriculum from Saudi Arabia, the other one from Yemen, the other one from Indonesia, and you find the students or the learners actually, it's a mess in terms of when it comes to curriculum. I've mentioned also the aspect of commercialization. Now it becomes a business, equally like health, education, and unfortunately it has been commercialized. So that is the scenario, and I hope and believe that maybe we'll need to look at that into detail and try to do some comparisons between the different countries in our continent and see the pros and cons. Of course, Islamic integrated system is one of the solutions, but it's not the solution, because still we have challenges, the ones I've mentioned. So what could be the future of our children? And this is part of my recommendations. Number one, try to inculcate the values of Islamic values of whatever system the children are taught. If it's GSE, if it is whatever, American or British, the most important thing is to try to inculcate the values, Islamic values, in that particular system. Kenya has tried have a kind of a program which it calls in trying to they call it integrating cohesive values. There's a commission called Commission for Cohesion and Values, something like that. It has come up with that project of trying to look at the syllabus of the conventional syllabus, but put values. For Kenya, it was common values, I mean, for all the citizens. But I'm saying on our Islamic part, we need to look at those values and try to inculcate on the different subjects. Something closer to the Islamization of knowledge, which has been, of course, pioneered by Al-Farouki, Ismail Raja Al-Farouki, Abu Sulaiman, and others. Try to Islamize the knowledge and see whether, because the whole essence is to try to bring a curricula which will benefit our kids. It will preserve their Muslim identity, but at the same time, it should not overburden those kids, so that they have time to play. Kids want to play. If you do whatever you're going to do, if you don't create a session for playing, and formerly we used to have a PE, which is basically a recreational kind of program. So we need to come up, 2 minutes, okay, fine. We need to come up with those kind of thinking, try to actually strike a balance between the two extremes, because the one extreme is to have a conventional setup where the child is only taught these normal formal subjects. On the other hand, we have the traditional setup where children are only taught Islamic subjects, and then in between we have this new notion of integration, trying to integrate between the two sides. But still, even the integration itself, it has issues. And for our information, not only in education, even in Islamic banking, we have challenges. Even in Islamic insurance, we have challenges. But these are ways of trying to come up with a solution, because that's actually the positive part of these initiatives. It could not be the solution. What we are seeing today in terms of Islamic banking is not 100%. What we are seeing in terms of Islamic takaful insurance is not 100%. But we are saying it's a step forward. So we need to try to refine and try to see how we can bring this notion of integration, whether it's by the way of Islamization, as Farouki and others have advocated, whether it's trying to maybe look at the curricula, whatever curricula is that, and try to inculcate values, Islamic values, so that our children in future, they become better than where we are now. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.